passionate logic.
New ideas and efficient tools for a happier, more connected life.
My previous coping mechanisms were work really hard and then work out really hard, so I'd be too tired to be stressed out or get angry. And I figured if I just worked really hard and worked out really hard, then all my stress would go away and I would never be mad again.
I was much more active with it. I actively just hoped it would go away. I would just do denial and withdrawal, and if some big stressful thing came at me, my first instinct was to back away and do nothing and hope that somebody else would jump in and save me, that maybe my parents would figure it out for me, or one of my friends would know what to do, or someone would tell me what to do. And if they didn't, then I would just be really quiet and hope it went away. And then I'd get really uncomfortable with that, so I'd have to go play some video games so I wouldn't have to think about it. And then maybe it would go away.
And how'd that work?
Not so much. I had people go away and opportunities went away, but the problems didn't really go away. They just seemed to get out of my sight and then multiply, or the pressure would increase and they'd build and build and build until there was no escaping it anymore. And then once it was so overwhelming, it was like a crisis, and then I had to do something about it.
Yeah, mine didn't work so well either. I would work 16, 20-hour days, be exhausted, and then find the anger keep creeping back in, and then getting bigger and louder. I did get bigger and stronger. I channeled a lot of energy into lifting weights until I would reach the pinnacle of, what life should be, the house and the car and the wife and the kid, and be the most miserable I've ever been in my life, because I was trying to work it out or work it off. Didn't work so well. It just seemed to drain me, and I would then find the anger popping up even in the smallest cases of when I thought I should be okay.
And I've seen in my years of teaching and working with people and talking with people, there's not that many coping mechanisms that people use. One of them is complaining about problems. You just find someone and you just rant or go off about it, not looking for answers, but just, this is terrible and you're a victim or a martyr, and why is life so hard, and this person shouldn't be doing that, and blah, blah, blah. And it doesn't fix the problem, it just makes you feel a little bit better and vent some of your frustration with it. But that isn't really an effective coping mechanism unless you're also getting feedback. I think one of the best ways is the helpful counterpart to that is if I go, I have this thing going on, and I don't know what to do, or I sound it off of you and say, can you just listen for a little bit? I just want to talk through this with someone, and I don't really need feedback right now, but sometimes talking through it, you go, well, I guess, maybe that is the solution. Sometimes you can find it through talking, especially if you're an extrovert. And it's helpful to know if you're partner with someone like that, if you say, can you just listen for a little bit? Because oftentimes the person will want to help, and sometimes they'll be like, well, have you tried? And you're like, well, I haven't even explained it all yet. And then at the end, you can say, after all that, can you give me some feedback? So you can get both parts, you can talk through it, and then they listen. And then at the end, you can say, okay, well, I think I figured some stuff out. What did you hear? And I think that's one of the most effective coping mechanisms for dealing with stress. And hopefully with someone who can give constructive feedback instead of someone that starts up well, yeah, that person shouldn't have been doing that, and that was horrible, and that isn't necessarily helpful if they're not giving specific actionable things or insights.
They're just giving you reasons why you should continue to be upset.
Right, yeah. And then they might not be someone who's actually wanting to help, they're just wanting to feed off of the negativity that you're generating. Or use it as an excuse to, okay, you're done venting, then oftentimes they won't be listening, they'll just be waiting. Okay, are you done? So now I can get my part about this thing that I don't like, or that person that did something wrong, or whatever it is.
Yeah, there are a lot of people who like to bond over negativity.
Yeah.
They're familiar with it. As you're talking, one of the things that's coming up for me is, like, what is it when you relieve stress? And what is stress causing? And for me, stress has a way of building pressure, like you mentioned earlier, and I just want that pressure to stop. And I'm virtually willing to do just about anything to make it stop, whether that's being bigger and louder than the person I'm talking to, or physically restraining them so that my anger and my frustration stops. And that's a sad way to deal with stress because it's inside of me. And I'm trying to make this perfect so I won't feel that. Because I want to feel the calm, I want to feel the connection to me, the connection to the other person, you, life. So stress for me is when I'm disconnected from that.
Another way of dealing with stress, another coping mechanism, is addiction. Something else that relieves the pressure. It can be alcohol, it can be video games like it was for me, it can be sex, it can be
overwork, over-exercising.
Yeah, binging on whatever it is, food, or binging on exercise, or
TV shows.
Trying to find something that will distract you to overwhelm that feeling of something is wrong, that there's a problem, and numb it out so that you can forget the problem. But again, that doesn't necessarily help because it's not addressing the problem.
It's not going to the root of the problem.
It's like going and drinking a beer because there's too many weeds in my garden, and that somehow is going to fix the garden.
Yeah, it fixes the way I feel about the weeds for that long.
Right. I can forget about my garden for a little bit, but there's still the weeds in there.
The thing about the blow up, getting really mad and yelling, getting really big and loud, the addicting part of that is there is some sense of peace at the end of all that explosion, which is where most of our family dysfunction, I believe, comes from, is getting to the calm after the storm. And yet the collateral damage along the way is just way too costly. So what is it that's going on in our mind that we could actually pull that pin and let that rail car go that keeps driving us crazy? It's really not up to you or anybody else to make me okay. It's in me. The feeling is in me with dis-ease. And it's up to me to find out where that comes from and how to disarm it.
There's another way of handling stress, and that is blaming other people. So if you go, I'm really stressed out about this thing, you can consciously say, that thing isn't my problem, it's your problem. If they're somehow involved with it too, maybe there's a problem going on with their kid, and my parenting is perfect, so it must be your parenting. Or, we're working on this project together and we're late, and it's obviously not because I'm not doing the work, it's because you're not doing the work. Or whatever it may be, that you can go, well, it's your fault, not mine, and that way you can relieve the stress because it's not your fault. The other more insidious and subtle way is projection. So rather than consciously going, it's your fault because of this thing isn't working that we're working on together, I can find somebody who's completely unrelated, and maybe I'm stressed out about something going on at home, and then I take it out on a coworker, and I project, maybe my partner is not holding up their side of household chores, and so then I snap at my coworker because they didn't get that report done like they were supposed to. And I take the stuff I'm upset about and I just start projecting it on everybody so I can lash out at it, or the person I'm upset with, instead of dealing with that person or whatever my problem is that I'm generating or whatever my part of it is. Then I go, I'm really upset with my dad, and so I'm just going to treat anybody who resembles my dad badly because they're causing me stress.
And in that regard, you can blame a whole group of people for your problems. We have a lot of that going on in the world. I might be upset about something, but I'm going to project outwards so I don't feel this inside that's uncomfortable and blame all that group of people for how I feel. If they weren't doing what they were doing or believing what they were believing, I wouldn't feel this. That's the scary part, isn't it? How big blame can go.
You can do it with genders, you can do it with races, you can do it with religions, you can do it with countries. I mean, any way you can subdivide humans, you can make it their problem that I don't feel okay.
There's another way people can deal with stress and anxiety as well. It's to play nice. How many of you know people who you can tell they're upset or they're angry, and then they have this, that's okay, honey, that has this few drops of venom dripping from it?
I think they're smiling, but they're baring their fangs.
Playing nice is dangerous because it's eating you up inside, and it's not really coming across as being nice to the other person. It's coming across as disingenuous when you play nice. Again, another coping mechanism that doesn't work really well.
Going with playing nice can also be, I've got a lot of problems and I don't know how to deal with them, so I'm just going to fix everybody else's problems. I'm going to get really controlling and micromanage and try and fix things that aren't my purview, things that are not really mine to fix. So it'd be like, I'm really upset about what's going on with money, and so I'm going to tell you about your money situation and how you should fix it. That's the more obvious one, or it can be much more subtle of, I'm upset because of some fight I had with my parents, and then I tell you how to fix your relationship with your kids. And because I don't feel in control, I'm not feeling okay, so my best way to do that is control everybody else around me. Another one, this is the one that I did, but to name it, it's denial. So just pretend there isn't a problem. Say, in my marriage to my wife, if there was something going on and I didn't know how to address it, or I didn't have the courage to talk to my wife about it, or I wasn't sure what was going on, rather than having a discussion about it or talking it through with someone neutral outside, or maybe looking up some advice, or any of those things might be constructive, I can just go, there shouldn't be a problem because other people don't have this problem, or if there's something wrong with our relationship, then there's something wrong with me, or the extreme game, well, if there's anything wrong with our relationship, then we'll have to get divorced and then I'll be alone, or all sorts of things your brain can do. So denying it in hopes either that it actually isn't a problem and you're wrong, or that it'll go away if you avoid it long enough, that is one that I'm very well aware of because I spent most of my life doing that. Avoidance, denial, not an effective coping mechanism. Another way of dealing with stress and anxiety is just get really passive aggressive. And so I'm feeling off and I don't know how to deal with it, so I'm just going to be really snarky and sarcastic and do all those little passive-aggressive things, saying everything just a little bit sideways with just a little bit of a hook on it, and that'll get rid of a little bit of my stress. Troy was all about straight-up aggression, a very active aggression of just blowing up at people, but passive aggression also not very effective.
Another coping mechanism is self-pity. Just to complain about life, how everything is bad and it's not your fault, which is a lot like being a victim, right? Just talking about how your whole life is out of your control and your reaction to your life is out of your control. Oh, woe is me. Self-pity. I've spent some time in that, and it's quite easy to bounce from self-pity to really loud, really angry, and then go back to self-pity, and then really loud, really angry. Not much peace in either one of them. Yeah, you mentioned earlier about how it just builds. Builds and builds and builds. How do you deal with stress and anxiety? Do you share any of the things that we're doing or that we previously did? I try not to do any of those things. But being human, there are things that are going to send us in that direction. I used to just blame anger management for being part of the problem because the problem is not after I'm mad. The problem is getting mad in the first place. How do I unwire that?
It's amazing how many different ways we try to avoid dealing with our problems. But one way is, I'm just going to prevent any problems from ever happening again, because I'm just going to do everything perfectly and then there won't be any problems. The downside of perfectionism is we're not perfect. And if you have perfection not as an ideal, but something you hold yourself to, an impossible standard that you must meet, then just your way of dealing with stress is probably one of the main causes of stress. And then because you didn't do everything perfect, then you revolve over, well, how am I going to do it better and how can I fix it? And the next thing you know, a lot of people I know who are perfectionists are insomniacs because they dwell on how do I fix it, what can I do, how can I do it better? And sometimes there is no answer because you're already doing everything to the peak of your ability and it's in someone else's hands, or it's not something you can control. Maybe the market that you're in business in changed, or maybe one of your kids has a problem you can't do anything with, or there's an illness, or whatever it is. Perfectionism is about control, and rather than necessarily dealing with problems as they arise, it's trying to control the future by being perfect now. And usually perfectionists not only have high standards for themselves, but they also have really high standards for other people too. Or they go, well, I'm not going to hold you to the same standard, because then there's that little sneaky, well, I'm better than everybody else because I'm going for perfection and they're okay with just doing the crap that they do. And so there can be these other little things that generate more stress and disconnect with other people.
And it's the stress that you put on yourself about having to be perfect with every single little thing that is so weighty. But it seems like it's a ticket out of anxiety and stress when you're in it. being perfect. But it's not. Earlier in my life, I somehow believed it was absolutely wrong not to know everything. A short-tailed cousin of perfectionism is lying. Lying because something in me believes it's wrong not to know the answer to whatever anybody asks me. And if I didn't know what the answer was, I would make something up just so that I wouldn't look like I wasn't perfect. I don't think that ever worked out very well for me. And lying is a behavior that is used quite often to deflect, to somehow make it okay to not feel the anxiety and stress that we think we're going to feel if we just say, I don't know. But the truth is, there's a lot of freedom in don't know. Try it sometime. If somebody asks you a question, you don't know the answer, just say, I don't know. And then check in with yourself in here and see if you're okay.
There's other ways of dealing with stress. One of them is caretaking, and this one is really sneaky because I'm not dealing with my problems because I'm so busy helping you with your problems. And then I'm not worried about my stress because I'm not important. Often there can be a belittling thing, like I'm not important, everybody else is important, which is probably something underlying a lot of the stress. And so I'm going to fix you, I'm going to fix you, and everyone around me, I'm going to make sure that they're all okay. And so I'm just going from person to person and figuring out what's wrong with them and how can I fix it. Do you need money? Do you need time? Do you need me to send you something? Do you need me to help you up? Do you need me to help you down?
Yeah.
Do you need me to listen? I'm going to sacrifice myself and I'm going to take the time, even though I don't really have 3 hours right now. And so one way of dealing with your own stress can be looking for other people's problems to solve, but then it gets really hard to dislodge because then you're being generous and you're being kind and you're doing unto others, and there's this nobleness that can come with that, but it's very, very subtle, and you might want to check in if that's behavior you do, especially if it's compulsive. Like if you start to get stressed, if you suddenly look for somebody else to fix, then often that's a caretaking thing, and that can be a way of dealing with stress. Even oftentimes it's the stress of I don't know what to do with my life, and so I'm just going to help everybody else get what they want with their life, and then I don't have to worry about my life because that's who I am.
What I'm noticing as you talk about caretaking is that I'm stressed. I have this uncomfortable feeling inside of me. And one of the ways that I've learned to not feel that stressful, anxious feeling is go help somebody else. And I can be quite noble in my helping other people. And I can take on helping lots of people. And at the same time, I don't accept help from anybody else, because I'm believing that the only way that I'm going to relieve this in here is to keep helping all these other people. And if somebody helps me, that's just going to give me more anxiety and stress because I'm so noble, I shouldn't need help.
Which ties into another coping mechanism related to perfectionism is just being strong. Especially if you're a guy, you just want to be tough and you want to take it. Like you can just handle it. You can handle your stuff. And oftentimes that doesn't come about through handling it because most of us guys are not taught how to handle our stuff. They just say, stop crying and suck it up.
Yeah.
Okay, well, suck it up and then what? So once you suck something up, what do? You just swallow it and just hold on to it. And the other one is just not be bothered by your problems. And I fall prey to this one sometimes, especially because I have this enlightenment drama of look at all this stuff I know and all the skills I have and all the things I've learned and the depth and breadth of my support network. I just shouldn't have these problems, or I'm too tough, or I'm too smart, too knowledgeable, too sensitive, too connected, whatever it is, that I don't have that problem. I shouldn't have any problems. I shouldn't have stress. And even if I do feel it, I shouldn't let anybody else know because I need to present this image of I'm tough and strong and holding everybody else up. Man, look at all these ways we have of dealing with stress. So far we haven't even hit on any that really work in a lasting way.
Nope.
But one you can do is comparison. So if I'm really stressed out, I can go, well, at least my life isn't as bad as this. Well, at least my relationship isn't bad as theirs. Or at least I'm not as bad with money as these people are. Or whatever it is, at least I'm not as out of shape as those people are. Or whatever we can find to compare other people to. And oftentimes to relieve stress, I'm like, well, I'm stressed out, but at least I'm not as bad off as those people. And it's a superior, I'm better than them because I don't have their problems. I can feel better about myself because of that.
Puffs up our ego for a really short period of time.
Right, as long as you're thinking about it. And then you
Right.
stop thinking about those poor suckers, and then
Lapse back into your own crap.
the other ways we can compare the other way and use that to build up pity. Well, my life is especially hard. Look at them. I deserve that life. I shouldn't have this problem because they don't have this problem.
Mhm.
Why is it me having this problem that nobody else has?
Nobody.
Yeah,
7 billion people on the planet. I'm the only one that has this problem.
yeah.
Right. Any of this sounding familiar?
One of the biggest doozies of a coping mechanism that I think all of us indulge in, and sometimes it does really feel like indulging, is procrastination. It is endemic. I don't know anybody, including myself, that doesn't procrastinate from time to time.
Been there, done that.
And procrastination is usually not because you don't know what to do, it's because your mind has it as too much work.
Or you just don't want to because it might be uncomfortable.
It might be uncomfortable, or it'll be hard, or unpleasant some way.
Mm-hmm.
But when you already know the course of action that you're probably going to take,
Mm-hmm.
and you're not really reflecting on it, generally all that does in my life is create stress. It's this thing that I know needs to be done if I want to move forward in my life.
Mhm.
If I know what that is and I'm not doing it, and I'm playing a video game or reading a book or getting on the phone with somebody or whatever it is I use to avoid it, to procrastinate, to not do it, all I'm doing is adding to my stress load in a way that I don't have to. It's in some ways the hardest one, in some ways the easiest to deal with, because all you need to do to fix procrastination is just set some time and do the thing. Sooner better than later.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to do that pile of paperwork on my desk, so tomorrow morning I'm just going to go in and do that pile of paperwork on my desk.
Mm-hmm.
And you probably have found, after you've procrastinated, when you actually do the thing, oh man, that wasn't actually that bad, is commonly what people say.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels so good to have that finally done with.
Mhm.
That broken part of the fence that I've been looking at for a year, I just
Mhm.
went out and got my screw gun and I fixed it. And now when I look out that window, oh yeah, that's fixed.
Mhm.
And then that thing that's been bothering me in the back of my brain for a year is
Yeah.
just gone. Procrastination also, knowing that it is on your to-do list but not actually getting to it,
Mhm.
I found it takes up, I call it CPU cycles. So part of my brain is keeping track of that thing that
Mhm.
I'm not doing, and it impedes my ability to do other things,
Mhm.
not just because of the stress, but because part of my brain is going, oh yeah, that thing, oh yeah, that,
Yeah.
oh yeah, that.
It is using up energy. And if you have enough of those, they can use up a lot of energy.
It can also be a signal when I really want to procrastinate. Usually that's when I take a deep breath and go, okay, what is it that's really going on? And it's very rarely the thing. It's very rarely that phone call or that email, that stack of paperwork or that thing that needs to be done in the yard or it snows or whatever it is. It's almost always something else that I'm suppressing or avoiding,
Mhm.
some other thing I'm not dealing with or I don't know how to deal with or that's troubling me,
Mm-hmm.
that's causing procrastination. And so it's even a coping mechanism that not only works to try and avoid stress, but it also is a signal about something else that's stressful to me. All these things start to thread together. First, I need to be strong, but then I'm stressed out because I'm being strong and nobody's helping me, so I'm going to go into pity every once in a while. I'm going to break down, well, I'm always holding everybody up in this family, or, I'm the only one who does any work around here. And then you throw into that, then you can get angry, and then you can relieve some stress that way. And then we kind of swirl around and weave from one drama that we think is serving us and helping us deal with our stress, and we just bounce from one to the next, but we're not feeling any better.
Mm-mm.
We're just juggling. It's like I have this big pile of garbage, and now I'm going to let you hold it for a little bit until you can't hold it anymore. But that you is just another part of me, another role that I play.
Mhm.
I'm just kind of passing the garbage around and not dealing with it.
And the culmination of that is progressively we feel worse. I spent 35 years in the fitness business believing that I was not only doing well for my own stress by working out, eating right, taking my body places I wanted it to go, but I was also believing that I was relieving stress. The more I worked out, the better I ate, the more in shape my body was, the less stress I would have. And it seemed to be working because there was a reduction in how much I experienced, but there was still stress available. And the same triggers would keep triggering the same response. I would come to realize later on, much later on, that my whole career in fitness and then believing I was helping people by relieving their stress was medicating their stress. not relieving it. It's helping to make you tired enough, exhausted enough, fit enough, but I wasn't actually stopping the same reaction from occurring to the same stimulus over and over and over again. It was just at a lower level, a lot like taking drugs or alcohol, so that whatever the stimulus is, you're not reacting quite so violently or to the same depth of depression.
But the difficulty with any sort of medication is it only lasts as long as whatever medication you're taking lasts. So the endorphins from working out, once those wear off,
A few hours.
or maybe it's fine as long as you're drinking, but unless you want to drink all day, and some people choose that option of they don't know how to deal with their stress, so they just stay always slightly medicated on something. I mean, if you're suicidal or you're on the edge and a schizophrenic breakdown or something, and you need something to help get you back from the edge, there can be a place. And I'm not saying there's something wrong with working out. I think working out specifically can be very helpful in some of the things it teaches you, the willpower to do things that are challenging,
Push your limits.
just the feeling of self-confidence you have from being healthier and more fit. Those things can be helpful, but the working out itself doesn't necessarily impart that. I know people who have worked out a lot and they're doing it not for those things, but they're doing it for external gratification of that can be another medication as long as you're telling me I'm okay. So I might look for someone to tell me you're okay or tell me how great I am and build me up. Then I walk away from that person and it turns out that was just another medication. Is when someone stops telling me how great I am, then I'm not getting medicated and then I'm not okay again. I need to get more social media accounts so I can broadcast to more people so I get more feedback of how okay I am. But I'm still not addressing the problem, and I'm medicating, making it go away for a little bit, but whenever whatever it is I'm using to medicate isn't there, I'm not okay. And for me in my life, I want the okayness to be something that I have by default, or something that I can get back on my own, because if you're relying on other people, well then you're reliant on other people. You are not independent, you are codependent. You are dependent on other people to make you okay. And for me, that's not okay. For other people, they choose to do that, and I did for most of my life. But I've made a choice that I'm going to be the one that decides if I'm okay or not. And for me, that's empowering. For me, when I was younger, that was terrifying. So if you want to follow along at home and do a little exercise, what you might do is write down or jot down or just think about whatever works best for you. What do you use to cope with stress? What is it? And just be totally honest about how you get by when something big and unexpected and stressful happens, or what about the little nagging constant daily stresses? Maybe you have different responses depending on what it is. But when you get stressed out, what is it you do? And there's no wrong answer, there's no judgment. Doesn't mean that you're wrong for doing those things. Sometimes I have a drama where clearly I've done all this personal work, so I don't get stressed anymore. And that's when it blindsides me, and then I'm up at 3 o'clock in the morning playing Candy Crush. And I'm like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? I'm missing sleep and missing out on relationships, and then I'm laggy at work and sluggish, and my brain isn't firing well, and then all the stress is harder. There's also little things we do, and we're humans, and most of us have not been taught, unless we had some sort of really rock solid mentor that gave us some tools. Most of us haven't been taught this. It's not something you take in school. It's not like you have math and then stress relief and then science and then problem solving skills.
Right.
It's not in our normal curriculum. So if you have something big, and maybe it's huge, maybe you have a major addiction, or maybe you have an extremely self-destructive behavior, or maybe it's just something little minor thing that, well, I'm snippy at my coworkers, or I nag my kids.
As you're talking about stress and what it does to your life when you realize that you're under it, what is it that's going on? Mine in the last 2 weeks is I'm missing an appointment. That's an indicator that there's something going on that I'm not aware of.
And that's actually, for me, my addictive, compulsive behaviors trigger when I do my avoidant video gamey things. For me now, that's an indicator exactly of that, of surface level stress I'm usually pretty good dealing with now, and we'll talk about some of the stuff we do to actually resolve the stress rather than just revolve around it.
Exactly.
But sometimes I'm not aware of it. Sometimes it's under the surface, or it's something I haven't acknowledged yet, or just so big I know it's there, but I don't know what to do about it. But for me, when I get drawn into those compulsive behaviors, because they're not habitual, they're not automatic, they aren't all the time, when I do get drawn to one, it's a signpost going, look here underneath, there's something going on.
Yeah.
And once I can draw out of it, I go, man, I'm really, really wanting to play a video game right now.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care what, I don't care if I like it or not. Then I go, why? What is it I'm so stressed out about that's causing that?
And then how do you deal with it? If you do have something going on, if you did write something down that is not working for you, and it's not in your best interest or your family's best interest, then what do you do about it? And that's some of the things we're going to be talking about here in just a little bit. What do you do with stress? How do you get to a different response? And quite simply, one of the things I used to do, I used to not have an anger problem, I would have a rage problem. If I dropped something or spilled something, I would go right into a rage about how stupid I am or how clumsy I am or what an idiot I am, usually with many explicatives as I got older, which I could hide and I could cover it up and I could keep it at bay until I started having kids. And then I didn't want that behavior anymore. And I worked really hard. Mark helped me quite a bit, seeing into myself on how to pull those pins. And over the course of a few years, now when I drop something or spill something, I get to laugh.
Now we know some ways that we deal with stress, but let's take a step back and delve in a little bit to what is stress and where does it come from? Why is it that we flood ourselves with cortisol all the time in our culture? Why do we bathe in this stuff? Why do we have so many stresses? Why is it we have a higher standard of living than pretty much anyone who's ever lived, and more conveniences and better technology and better medicine, and yet we seem to be less and less happy as individuals in society? So why is that? Well, one thing that comes to mind is this equation for suffering. And for me, it's one of the most helpful things I've ever heard that helped me deal with my life and my problems, is life is here. And sometimes it's not going so well, and sometimes we're unhappy about it, and sometimes it's going great and things are just getting better and it's looking up, and sometimes it's kind of flat. But life is here. At this moment, it's here and it's going up and down, and my perception of it, I don't like that thing, or I like this thing that's happening now. And that's reality. Then here is where I expect it should be. I'm okay, but I should be great. Or right now I'm feeling terrible, I should at least feel okay. Or this thing happened that I don't like, this thing should have happened that I wanted. And this right here, the difference between those two, that is suffering. Again, life is here. I think my mind tells me it should be here, so I get to suffer this much. This is life should be here, life shouldn't be here. Hope is someday life might be here. If I can make it through this, if I can do the right thing, if I can survive this, life could be here. But if you think life shouldn't be here, maybe you think you don't deserve this. Maybe life is here and you think life should be down here because, well, I'm a loser and so I shouldn't be. Then that's suffering too. You can suffer because life is too good. If your life is here but you think it should be here, that can also be suffering because you think you don't deserve it, or somebody else should have gotten it, or you're a loser, or you have some negative belief about yourself that says you don't deserve it. Well, you can suffer that way too. So life should be here because it sucks and it should be great, or life should be here because I'm a loser, I don't deserve this. Either one, that is where in my life I found most of my suffering comes from. Like even today, I have this to-do list of all these things that I need to do. I shouldn't have to do all those things. Right there, that is the cause of my stress this morning, was believing I shouldn't have this giant to-do list of stuff. When you work 110 hours in 2 weeks, there's not a lot of time to deal with all the little things in your to-do list. If I go, yep, I have a to-do list, yep, I have a to-do list, then I can handle it. As long as I don't think I should have a to-do list, then I'm going to have a problem.
One of the things I've noticed about the English language is it's one of the most judgmental languages on the planet, with words like should, have to, must, always, never, need. And even just using those words, you can check this out for yourself. If you say I have to get out of bed at 8 in the morning, as opposed to I choose to get out of bed at 8 o'clock in the morning, there's a difference on which one's connecting and which one's separating. What words we choose to use in our language have an effect on our physical body and our level of stress and anxiety. Just one of the things, along with the mathematical representation of stress being what your mind says it should be different than how it is, as opposed to this is where it is, and being with that. I like to use the analogy of every time I use the word should or have to, it's like picking up a rock and putting that rock in my backpack that I then carry around for the rest of my life until I lay it down. So it's no wonder that many of us feel stress and anxiety, like physically weighted down and tired, because of even choices that we use in our language can be adding more weight to our load. Another rock to the backpack. Try noticing every time you say should, have to, must, always, or never, just in 1 hour. How many rocks did you add to your backpack?
If you have should, that is not a complete thought. I should do this, and there's a because of or an or else. And if you don't fill that in, then usually something negative from your subconscious, at least in my experience, if I actually examine it and write out that shouldn't have turned out that way, and then ask yourself, well, what's the because that's actually underneath that? Because life should be fair. Well, who says life should be fair? Or they shouldn't have said that because I'm too good a person. However you fill it in, that other part, if it is not direct, I will use the words I have to do this if I want to. So if I want to get in shape, I have to work out, as far as I know. To the extent of my knowledge, if I want to get in shape, the way to do that is generally through working out. So that is a complete statement. But if you say I have to work out and don't fill in the rest, then your brain and whatever negative beliefs you have built in and stored up and that are tied down at the root of you, tangled like knots around whatever it is that you is, they'll be like, I have to work out because if I don't, I'm going to be alone, or no one will love me, or I'll just prove again that I'm a loser, I'm worthless. If you say never or always, for me, I have a really hard time listening to people trying to present an argument, and they say, those sort of people always. Well, if you use the words always or never, those are absolutes. If you find one exception, it's no longer true. And sometimes that can be helpful if someone's really aggressive in my face and said, you know what, you always, then that helps me take a step back and go, okay, they just said always, is it true that I'm always that way? If I say no, then I can take a step back and their language bounces off of me a little bit, because I know that what they're saying is not rational at this point. It's usually emotional. And they're not saying what they're actually saying. They think they're saying that, but they're actually saying something else. And then I can go, okay, I want to listen more to what's going on for this person and not their words, because always or never, you never do this. Well, I did that one time, so that's actually not a valid statement. And so it can be used as a tool in that way too, in confrontation. But if you are making statements like that, especially if you're trying to persuade people, then you can very quickly disconnect the more reasonable members of your audience, because they'll just go, well, there's a case where that isn't true. It's not true that all policemen are, or all Mexicans are, or all people from Europe are, or all men, or all women, or all kids, or all old people, or all these judgments we put. If there's one exception, no longer valid.
It's not true. It's like theory. It only takes one exception to make it not a theory anymore.
Yeah.
Our mind believes those words make our statement stronger. But how does it work for you when people use those words in that language? Is it making their statement stronger, or do you discount them right away? The definition of stress that I like, that seems to be the most accurate, came from a medical doctor who said, stress is the real or perceived threat against your physical body or your ego. 1 million years ago, stress was staying alive. Your mind having to discern or judge if that berry is edible and will help me survive, or that berry is going to kill me, or that big furry animal is okay to go hang out with and can get milk from, and that other furry animal is going to eat me. So we had lots of threats against our physical body. Nowadays, not so much. So why is stress so high? Another fact about stress and perception against your physical body is that your chances of dying a violent death in America are the lowest it's ever been for any human on the planet since the Middle Ages. So why are we stressed? Well, it's that thing called ego. It has perceived threats all the time. Just the fact that we think 50,000 thoughts a day and most of them are not true, that could be 50,000 attacks on your ego in one day.
Even when we are involved in physical violence, oftentimes if two people get in a fight, a physical fight, then when the police come up, they're both going to claim self-defense, and they're not just saying it to try and get the other person in trouble, get out of it, though that's probably part of it. What they're saying is they actually believe it, because one of the posturing things that often happens before a fight is the two people yell at each other and push, and part of what they're doing is they're inflating their ego boundary to expand so they can justify violence to themselves, so that it actually, in their minds, if I equate myself and my physical safety with my girlfriend or my sports team or this chunk of the bar, and then you are in that space, I can mentally, especially when there's alcohol or drugs involved, I can very quickly equate you being in this space that I have now made part of me as an attack on me, justifying a physical response. Even in that way, the perceived threat against your ego can result in physical violence because you've made this false equivalency. They said something threatening, and because I am equating my well-being with my ego, then therefore we can fight.
The threats against our ego really come from the things that our mind tells us all the time, the negative core beliefs, things that come from the outside world stimulate our mind to say things like, you're unlovable, you're unforgivable, you're not enough, you don't matter, you're powerless, you're weak, you're a coward. And then we react, sometimes violently, from that, because there's a big threat to our ego. But there's another way to wrangle what's going on in your mind and then respond instead of reacting.
Even if you have those beliefs down there. I've been working on it for 12 years, but I have down there somewhere still lodged deep in the center of my psyche. I've been able to pry it out yet, but I still have beliefs that I'm a failure and I'm going to be alone and that I'm unlovable. There's a bunch of other ones, and most of us have all of them to some degree. I'm worthless or whatever your beliefs are. Usually there's a few that really, really have sunk to the core of your being, and those ones have lodged in for me. With all my work, those are still there, and if I really start to get stressed, I can quick check in. Well, is it because of this, do I think I'm going to be a failure? Do I think because of this I'm going to be alone? Do I think because of this I'm going to be unlovable, and prove that I'm those things? Prove I'm unlovable, prove I'm a failure, prove that I'm going to be alone. And so almost all my stress still, eventually, if I trace it down far enough, it's hitting one of those nerves.
Or sometimes all three.
One of the things that I have found really helpful when trying to figure out what to do about the things that are causing me stress, all my worries and fears, is write them down. Writing them down can be somewhat cathartic, and actually seeing them physically typed or handwritten gives you a different perspective on it, literally and figuratively. But after you write them down, you can help figure out which ones to potentially address. And you're going to have 3 columns that you're going to judge each of these on. And the first one is, how immediate is it? How often? What is the frequency of this thing? How overwhelming is it? So 10 is, it might kill me in the next few days. So I've been vomiting blood, or I've been fainting daily, several times a day. So those are things that might be life-threatening, and that's probably a 10. 1 is, every once in a while it happens. It happened to me once last year, and I think it happened this year. So that's extremely rare. So frequency, how often is it a problem? How immediate is the problem? Another one is control. How much control do you have over that? 10 is, I am solely in the driver's seat. I can decide. So maybe I'm slouching. I can straighten up, unless you have a physical thing that impedes you. But generally, I can straighten up. So there are things that you have immediate control over, and 1 or 0 even is what they call acts of God. So is there going to be a tornado in town this year? Is there going to be a big earthquake? Is the world economy going to do something or other? Most of us are not in a place where we can do anything about that. So 10 is things that you have personal direct control over. 5 is maybe something where it's half mine and half somebody else's, or where I have partial, I can do something about it. I can get insurance, for example, maybe I can do something about it. So how much control do you have over it? Then lastly is, which is the most important to me? Which, if I address it, is going to have the most positive gains in my life or remove the most negative things? Or what do I feel the most strongly about? So maybe it's some sort of political activism, or maybe it's something with my church or my community or my family, or something in my life I've wanted to do for a long time. Maybe it's really important, that's a 10. Maybe 1 is, it's on my bucket list to do maybe someday before I die. That's a 1. One thing that might be helpful to do is, when you first categorize these, your brain is going to tend, because it's often been dwelling on these a long time, to list all of these as 10s. These are all immediately important, in my control, I need to do it right now. But if you go through and find most of the numbers are high, go back a second time and go, is that hurting my toe, kicking the door, is that really a 10 that it's, it's a little bit sore and bruised? Or is, my 5-year-old said a bad word, is that really a 10? If I don't do anything about it right now, somebody's going to die? Probably not.
Nope.
It might seem ridiculous, but your brain often will inflate, in my experience, those things to life-threatening proportions just by dwelling on it and never taking a reasonable look at what is actually going on and what you can do something about and how important it is. Let's say you're a prehistoric human and you are walking on the African savanna and you look around and you see there's a tree and you go, okay, in a couple of months that tree usually has fruit, and over there there's some water, and that water is clean because it's flowing, and over there that's not good water, I got sick last time I drank that, and over there there's a bird, and that bird isn't a threat and they're really hard to catch, and over there there's a lion, and over there there's an elephant, and wait, there's a lion. Your brain will jump to that negative stimulus over pretty much everything else as a survival mechanism. It'll go, there's a lion, immediate threat, warnings go off in your brain, and you remember people warning you about lions, and you've seen lions attack things, maybe you've been attacked by a lion, and so there's this space in your brain that is reserved for threats that big. And it seems in our human psyche, we still have this spot that we hold for these giant existential threats. The problem with that nowadays, though, is we don't generally have giant, real, daily existential threats. Most of us don't walk down the street and expect to be attacked by a lion, or reasonably expect. Even if you are in a city with an extremely high crime rate, the odds of you being actually attacked are quite low. Even in war zones, they say, I've read statistics that something like 2 or 3% of soldiers actually are killed in combat. So even if you're a soldier and there's people actively shooting at you, your odds of getting killed, while much higher than the rest of us, are still quite low. The existential threat spot, I call it the lion-shaped or the lion-sized hole, we have that reserved, but nowadays there isn't anything to fill it.
No physical threat.
Yeah, there's no physical thing out there that can fill it, especially immediate ones. Some of us might be out of work, or we don't have food in the cupboard right now and we don't have money to pay for it, but it's not immediate existential. We're not going to die right now because of it. And those are still problems, and those fill part of the hole.
But you could make it fill the hole. Like, if we don't have the physical threat of a lion, the mechanism is still there. What is our mind filling it with?
Right. If we don't have lions, in my experience, we tend to do one of two things. You take something that is threatening, maybe it's terrorism, or maybe it's fear about your job, or your relationship, or your kids, or some disease, or
your dog might die.
Or maybe someone said something mean on social media, or something you disagreed with. One of my favorite internet posters is just a big sign that says, "Oh no, someone on the internet is wrong." You can take things like that, little things that are not really that much of a threat, and you just spin it and spin it and spin it. As you spin it, it inflates as you spend more time on it, until that guy trash talking me on Facebook, or reacting to my YouTube comment, or tweeting something I disagree with, suddenly I'm experiencing that with as much of a stress reaction as though it was a lion, a physical lion, in the room with me. And we can create things and amplify things till they create that much stress for us, because some part of our brain is wired, negative stimulus can kill me.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't have one, it'll try and fill one up. You might have noticed in your life that there always seems to be a problem. If you let them dwell, they get bigger and bigger and bigger. And if you handle it, then something else will be the problem. So maybe you have $1 billion, and billionaires don't seem to be that much happier than the rest of us because they just create new problems. Well, I only have $1 billion, I could have two. Or maybe I have $1 billion, but that company that makes up $500 million of it is at risk. No matter how well our material needs are met, we still have that hole that we either cobble together 1,000 little things that we kind of dwell on and create to be existential, or we take a couple little things and inflate them and I'm dwelling on it. We respond to it as though it is an immediate existential threat. And then we get all the threat stress responses. We get that flood of hormones and we get angry, and those things are designed to keep us alive in a situation where
Physical threat is really there.
where I need to run or fight. And our body gets flooded with those, but if you don't use them, then they're toxic.
And the fact that your mind can keep generating that threat 24 hours a day, and you're constantly exposed to the cortisol and the adrenaline, it's no wonder you're worn out and tired.
And the media knows about this, and it seems like American news especially is designed to give you things to slot into that lion-sized hole to make sure you always have something big and existential to worry about. Our brains are amazing problem-solving machines. However, if you don't know how to turn the machine off, it will look and seek. It is designed to solve problems. If all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. If all you are designed to do is solve problems, everything looks like a problem. And so your brain will seek out things to turn into problems that it can then chew on and fix. But sometimes it picks something that is not fixable.
How do you wrangle that brain? How do you live with 50,000 thoughts a day that are being pumped into a false reality of a lion-sized hole of some threat against your ego or physical body that it's creating all by itself? It's no wonder there's so much anxiety and stress in our country. The basic element that you're talking about that's filling that lion-sized hole is fear. And you even hinted at there are many marketers out there that use fear to motivate people to action, fear of loss. Is that something that you want to keep being a part of?
One thing that I found is really helpful when I am dealing with stresses is to actually write out the things that I'm stressed about. That can be somewhat cathartic to actually see them written down, and sometimes you just go, well, that's just ridiculous, and sometimes you go, wow, actually, really, that's more urgent than I thought. You know, maybe I should do something about that if I want to resolve it. But that gives you something actionable. It gives you a list where you can actually see it and go, you know what, this is actually not that big a deal.
One thing I would add right on the end of that would be a visualization of what it's going to look like when you're on the other side of that. Because worry that gets us into anxiety and stress is simply negative visualization. When you write these things down and what you can get accomplished, then picture yourself having or seeing your result and how that's going to be on the other end, and then what life is going to be like, and see if you can actually feel that in your visualization. Will help make it stronger
and motivate you to actually take action, because some of the things might not be that
fun
or that easy, or you might not even know what to do yet about it. If you're desperately unhappy about something, then knowing what to do, or maybe you're depressed. Depression is especially difficult, and apathy can be very difficult to get out of. But if you can picture yourself experiencing that or getting that or achieving that or making a contribution to it, that can give you enough energy to help you take whatever the first step is.
One of the reasons Mark and I work so well together is Mark, as you guessed, is an introvert, and I'm an extrovert. Mark is very analytical. We'll do things like, listing things out and categorizing them and putting numbers to it. I look at that and I go, that just seems like way too much work for what I'm going to get out of it. One of the things we both agree on that's really helpful is paying attention to what our mind is doing with the event that's currently at hand, and that the event doesn't necessarily cause our reaction to it, because we have a mind. And the event happens, our mind interprets it through a neural network that's connected to everything that's ever happened to us in our past. And then in 1/12 of a second, we spit out a reaction. And many times we believe the reaction we don't have any control over. We really believe the other person caused my reaction, that it was so instinctive, gut level, that I have no control over it. But that's not true, because my mind is what created the reaction, not what the person said about it. An example would be, if it was true that the event caused the reaction, everybody would feel the same way when it rains. How do you feel when it rains?
Depends. If it's been really hot, sometimes it's a relief.
Mm-hmm.
If we're going to go hiking, then sometimes it's disappointing.
Yeah, farmers love it when it rains, if it rains at the right time. So rain doesn't cause their response, it's what their mind is doing with it, just like your mind is doing with it depending on what else is going on. Since it's our mind that causes the reaction to the events in our lives, the good news is we can do something about it because it's our mind. So we can actually reclaim what our mind is doing about that event to have a different response. I used to drop things and spill things and go right into a rage, starting as a small boy and coming on up through adulthood. And I really didn't want to do that anymore because I wasn't helpful to myself or other people if they drop something or spill something, especially my kids. The bad news is, if I have the ability to do that, I can no longer blame the other people for my reaction anymore, because it's all up to me. It's my mind that's creating that reaction. My responsibility is what my mind is doing with it. One of the great clues that we have is our physical body, from our neck down to our pelvis, and learning to actually feel what happens there in an event that we don't like. With Mark's help, I was able to check in to my body enough that when I would drop something or spill something, or revisit an event in the past of when I dropped something or spilled something, that I would have this kicked in the gut feeling. I would have this tightness in my chest. My throat would close up, like I couldn't breathe, and my jaw would clench really hard. And from these feelings in my physical body, we would be able to go into my mind and get down to those negative core beliefs that were coming from when I was 3 years old. I'm out in the shop with my dad on the farm, and my mind is telling me that it's a really great day because I'm going to be a big boy and I get to help my dad work in the shop on some equipment, and I'm holding the lug nuts and I drop them and he calls me a goddamn dummy. And my mind puts in place that I'm unforgivable and I'm stupid. Then coming out of that event to real time, it's not true that I am stupid. It's not true that I am unforgivable for dropping the lug nuts in the shop when I was 3 years old. And with practice and programming, like visualizing ahead of, okay, so in the future, if I drop something or spill something, the truth is I'm forgivable. The truth is I have intelligence. And then visualizing, feeling open and relaxed and calm from here to here, it would take a while, but I would eventually get to the response I wanted. The response was to have no feelings in here that weren't calm, open, relaxed. And now when I drop something or spill something, I get to laugh. Or if one of my kids drops something or spills something, even if my kid's 35 years old, I get to be there in a way of, oh honey, are you okay? Is there something I can do to help? Instead of saying, oh you goddamn dummy, shouldn't have done that. Our minds create our reaction, not what happens to us. And the good news and bad news is, the good news is we can do something about it. The bad news is we can no longer blame other people or life for our reaction.
For me, that's not only helpful for myself to deal with reactions. Now I know if someone says, you're making me angry,
That's not true.
that's not true, because I'm not capable of making them angry. I'm capable of providing stimulus that they might respond to in a way that comes out as anger, but it's not actually me that's making them angry or sad or upset or depressed or whatever negative thing that they're attributing to me. It's not actually me causing it. That doesn't mean I can just go through my life willy-nilly and go, well, everyone's problems is their problems, I'm totally not responsible. But it does mean if someone projects onto me, you're making me X right now, I can go, is it true that I'm actually doing that? Or what is it that I'm doing that's creating a stimulus without being responsible and having that guilt of making them angry? I've found it's harder for others to manipulate me and harder for me to fall into negative patterns and beliefs and blame myself for things that I might have had a hand in, but they're not solely my responsibility. I cannot make Troy sad. I could do things that make it more likely that he's sad, but his sadness is up to him. And if I can remember that, then it is a huge relief when dealing with people when they're having negative emotions, especially in confrontations. If someone is yelling in my face, it is much easier to be calm when I know that that is their anger, not something that I am creating. And I can take responsibility and say, how am I contributing? And I can help them get to the bottom of it. But I don't have that defensive feeling or guilty feeling of, I am doing this to you.
And because it doesn't activate the core, the negative core beliefs are triggered in other people. But we're not the ones who trigger it. We're not the ones who are believing that about the other person. They're the ones believing it. Or if I'm the one who's upset, I'm the one who's believing, quite simply, I'm believing something about myself that's not true. And if I can inhabit the part of me that is the truth, that is lovable, is forgivable, is enough, and it matters, what I choose to call my essential self, then the physical feelings that show up in my body are open, relaxed, full breath. I like that.
An image that I found really helpful that came to me years and years ago when Troy and I were doing some work is you can imagine our bodies have all these gaping wounds. And some of them are deep and some of them are shallow and some of them are layered on top of each other. But for me, I'm a failure is this really deep wound that goes all the way to the core of me. And something like that person doesn't like me, that's a little shallow nick, depending on who the person is. Someone on the internet doesn't like me, that is a little graze. Those wounds are tender. And so if someone pokes you in such a way that that gets triggered, then I go, you're poking me in the wound. But I don't say that. I go, you're hurting me. That thing you're doing, you're causing me hurt. When in reality, it's the wounded part of me that is responding because I have this wound, usually from when I was a child, that then was locked into place. It's like scar tissue. As you grow up, you have your wounds and you get scar tissue over them. It doesn't heal it. And they might be layered on top of each other. So my fear of being alone might be layered on top of being a failure or vice versa. And so if I think someone's going to leave me, then maybe I'll respond more strongly than belief that I'm a failure, but they might overlap. I think of my job to make my life happier is to work on healing my wounds. You can think of it as you're covered in buttons. Some of the buttons are big, some of them are small, some of them go straight to some really hot-wired, red-hot response. Some of them you have to push it and hold it down for a long time before something happens.
Or poke it several times.
Exactly, yeah. But if someone's pushing my buttons, those are my buttons. If I'm wounded, those are my wounds. And it's not up to other people. So my job is to dismantle those buttons. When you hit here, okay, that one I respond to really strongly. Why is that? And I can dismantle it. And I've had experiences where, before that set me off, and now you can hold it down and there's no response because it's healed, it's fixed. That thing that used to trigger me, it no longer triggers me.
Unwired and rewired.
Yeah. Now there's no response or there's a positive response.
I like no response. After years of exploding in anger, when I drop something or spill something, I really like that first time I experienced no response, which would then become laughter.
Became a positive. Yeah. If you think something's wrong with you, then as far as I know, pretty much every human I've met believes that. And if there is something wrong with us, it's that we have a past, we have a memory, and we have this, as Troy said, this neural net, and all of this history of being hurt and our ways of trying to get our needs met. And we've cobbled them together crudely and ad hoc. We're just making up as we go when we're kids and trying to get through and survive with all these different inputs from our parents and from our peers and from media and whatever communities we're involved in, our siblings. So we're getting all these inputs and we're trying to cobble together something that works out of all of that. And if you're wiring your own house and you've never done it before, but you have to in order to get through the next day, you're going to probably wire it wrong. You're going to have things that are not wired well, and they cause things to short out and cause fires or don't work all the time.
Unless you have somebody show you how to wire it.
Right.
Which we don't have too much of that in our culture for now.
There's more and more. Again, like Troy said, there's a good side and a bad side. The good side is I can do something about it. The bad side is if I want it to change, I have to do something about it because it's not up to him anymore to not push my buttons. Because that's the thing, if you've got buttons, they're going to get pushed. To complete the clause, if I want it to change, then I have to do it. If I don't want to change, I don't have to do it. So if I wanted to change, then I'm the one required to change it, not you, not anybody else, because no one else can.
Mm-hmm.
My hope is to someday have no buttons left, or to use the other metaphor, to have all of my wounded places healed,
Mm-hmm.
so that when people bump up against me in life, physically or metaphorically, that I can respond in a way I choose instead of something that's hardwired from my past.
Mm-hmm.
And I can replace negative responses with neutral or positive responses, not only for myself to make my life better and more positive,
Mm-hmm.
but to better the lives of everyone around me. People have hard lives. Our lives are hard,
Mm-hmm.
and we have all these wounds. And if I can not respond to people, then I can give them some neutral place where maybe they can heal. So that's the best thing I think I can do for other people, is to work on myself so that they have peace and safety and comfort and just neutrality, a place or a person that they can be around where they can feel safe enough to let down their guard and relax and maybe find a way to begin to heal.
One of the things that's coming up as you're speaking about that would be a goal for how I would like to respond to people instead of reacting. If somebody's heated or upset, or there's a confrontation, or they're escalating in their anger or upset, ideally, I would like to respond in an open, loving, and compassionate way. Because in my many years of responding with more anger or more rage than they have, hasn't worked out so well. And I did get to have the experience one time of working on a commercial, and the producer was so upset, he's yelling so hard, he's spitting on me. He's that close to me. And I was able to be in that open, loving, and compassionate space just by getting that he's upset. I'm not the cause of his upset. I'm not making him yell at me. Whatever's going on in his mind is doing that. And I just listened to his words. And when he took a breath, I was able to repeat a few of those words back to him, which completely de-escalated that part. But the amazing part was getting to feel none of that kicked in the gut feeling, tightness in the chest, not breathing, clenched jaw, and being physically open to what was happening, and then not reacting to it, and getting to choose the response. Okay, I could yell back, or I could repeat the last thing that he said. In that case, it was actually the last three things that he said that were good points that we then went to work on, and problem solved.
Most of us have triggers. We have button issues and things that we respond viscerally and immediately to. If you don't want to be trapped in that reactive cycle of someone does that thing, you react, and then there's usually some negative consequences, here's something you can actually do. And Troy and I both have slightly different approaches to this, so we'll lay out both of them, and then whichever one clicks more with you, you can try that one out. One way you can approach this is write down whatever it is that you get triggered by. Maybe it's when someone calls you a certain name, or says a certain thing, or talks about something, or maybe you don't like being touched in a certain way, or whatever it is that triggers you, that you have very strong. The stronger ones are in some ways easier because they're easier to recall. If you have a strong trigger, a strong response to something, you can write down, what are the things I'm triggered most by? And then you can look at it and go, well, why do I do that? What is it that I'm defending, or what is it that I'm responding to or believing? You can go, what is it that's causing me to do that? And then you can look at that and say, how would I rather respond when someone does that thing that makes me upset, reactive? What would I rather do? In order to solve a problem, the first thing you do is define what the problem is and where you want to go. And so that gives you a good basic framework for, here's the things that I don't like that I'm doing, and where I can go with them.
And the point I would like to add to Mark's process is the part between how you currently react and how you would like to respond might be a deeper investigation into what your mind is doing with that from the trip from here to here. That would be adding in a couple of things. One would be, what is it that your trigger or your button is, like Mark said? What's your current reaction to that response?
Like physically in your body?
Physically in your body is the part that I want you to write down, is what are you sensing when that happens? If this person says or does that thing that you really don't like, what's going on in here? Is it a kicked in the gut feeling? Is it a bowling ball dropped in there? Is it tightness in your chest? Is it your heart stops or your heart goes faster? Do you get shallow breath, or do you stop breathing, or do you have a tightness or a lump in your throat? Do you have a clenched jaw? Like these, what are the physical things that are going on in your body? List them. The person said something, you have this negative reaction going on, you want to know what the physical feelings are, because those physical feelings are going to be a better memory to what your mind was saying about that, whether the event was a week or 2 weeks ago, but then also what other events it's connected to all the way back to your beginning. Then, now that you have those physical feelings written down, you put yourself back in that moment, visualizing it, and then you say, okay, what's my mind saying about 3 categories? The judgments on myself, the judgments on the other person, and the judgments on life. You might drop right into core beliefs. Usually that takes more training, but you will get to what your mind was saying about yourself. That's usually not true. About the other person, that's usually not true. And about life itself, that's usually not true. And a big one on life is it's unfair. Or that life should be different, right? That person shouldn't have died. Truth is, they did die. And then you have these feelings that you just didn't like it. And then how would you like to respond? Like Mark said. And then visualize yourself having that.
Our egos are a protective mechanism. They were designed to keep us safe back when there were regular physical dangers, where you might go outside and get attacked by someone or something, and the world was constantly dangerous instead of occasionally dangerous. And now it has a couple downsides. One is that in order to make us respond to those scary things that might happen to us, there might be a snake in that hole, so it would create a vivid image of a snake coming out and biting you to make you avoid that hole and not be careless. But now it tends to exaggerate, as we've talked about a bunch before, of making things that we view as negatives and scary and making them very big so that you respond to them. But now that those things aren't physical dangers, there aren't holes with snakes in them commonly. It's emails and text messages and conversations with coworkers and things we see on TV. It still responds as strongly, believing it's protecting us. One of the things it does to try to protect us too is tries to control the future. And the way it does that is by making the present look as much like the past as possible. Even if the past is awful and you're having a horrible experience, maybe an abusive relationship or a job that you despise or a habit that's really unhealthy, you have those things, but they're comfortable and they're familiar, and the ego at least knows what happens with those. At least my significant other only beats me once a month. Maybe if I left them, I'd have no food, or maybe I'd find another partner that beat me once a week. So instead, it goes, okay, we're just going to stay with this because we know this. It's predictable. It's regular, it's consistent. The ego is trying to create a framework of stability in a world that's always changing. It's trying to create a belief system in this is going to be the same, and then it clings to that for safety.
It makes it easier for the mind.
Yeah, it makes it easier for the mind if it has this familiar, unchanging framework, but we know in our experience of life, life changes all the time, in spite of our attempts to keep it the same. Things are always changing. Our bodies are changing, our relationships are changing, our beliefs are changing in subtle or sometimes not subtle ways, moment by moment, by the decisions we're making, by the experiences we're having. Life is constantly changing, we're changing, things are breaking down, things are being built, things are being invented, things are being forgotten. So life is changing, but our minds try to lock it into a mold, and when that mold gets threatened, then we respond with a stress reaction. And we go to our fight or flight instincts and try and protect not ourselves, but our ego's framework of this is reality, we need to keep it like this.
You need to protect that.
Yeah. A short way of explaining it is the ego tries to control the present by making the future look just like the past. Part of us that is our ego, that part of us that's trying to protect us in that way, that really reactive, defensive way, it thinks it has our best interest in mind, and it's trying to protect us that way.
When it comes to anxiety and stress, we're hardwired from almost a million years ago at the basal brain, before we even had a prefrontal cortex, to stay alive. So if there's something that makes us fearful, then that primal part of the brain goes to work to get us out of that situation, or to make us freeze up so that the dangerous thing will pass, or be able to stand and fight. And then comes along a prefrontal cortex, which has 50,000 thoughts a day, and then the physical dangers, or even the choices that we make each day. We don't have to choose, okay, these berries are going to kill me, or those berries are going to be okay, or I can pet this animal, or that animal is going to kill me. Those aren't threats that the basal brain is deciphering, but it's still in there running its fear-based reactions. But now it has 50,000 thoughts a day that most of them are still searching for the negative thing that might hurt us. And how do we avoid that to stay alive? Have you ever noticed how many of your friends and family seem to bond with other people over negative events or negativity in general? Get together and gossip, get together and complain, which really doesn't relieve any pressure. It just creates more anxiety and stress. So you can see that we're hardwired all the way back to that primal brain to stay away from things that are going to kill us.
But now they aren't things that are going to kill us most commonly, every once in a while. But they're things we've manufactured, but then still respond to that way with that primitive part of the brain.
Yeah, the mind has the same physical response to thoughts of perceived threat as it actually does to a physical threat.
And that's one reason why horror movies work and why people are into them, is it triggers that fear response of I need to get to safety, and it gives this certain hit of emotional chemicals that are hard to get at other ways without creating a fear. And that horror works because our brains get into that image and that story and make it real for us. It wouldn't be interesting, and horror movies would be really boring if they didn't scare us. If our brains didn't create a reality where that was actually happening, then there would be no response.
Yeah, the physical response is the same, whether your brain is imagining it or it's actually physically happening right in your reality.
Our egos are trying to protect us. They believe that part of our brain, whatever it is we call the ego, that conglomeration of thought centers of the brain that work together to try and keep us safe in a reactive way, they're doing what they think, or that part of us is doing what it thinks it needs to do to keep us safe. Control the future by making the present look like the past. It believes that because that's familiar, it knows how to handle it. And so even if it is extremely negative, it will try to reproduce it so that it can handle it, because it's better to have the devil you know than the devil you don't. You don't know what's going to happen if I leave this abusive significant other, or if I quit this job that's toxic. So your brain often will say it's better just hunker down and survive it, get through it, because it's familiar, than risk going out and doing something that might be worse. In optimization, they call it local maxima. You look around and you see this is the highest hilltop I can see, and there might be just out of sight, there might be a mountain that's way up higher, but your brain goes, this is as good as it gets. You look around and you go, okay, my job is horrible, but my friend over there is unemployed living on the street, and my friend over there can't find a job. So this seems to be the best thing, even though there might be, if I just take a couple steps that way, there's my dream job. It has found a place that seems to be the best of all the easy options within reach, or at least all the known and familiar, less risky options. So it will stick with that. The other downside of your ego doing this is when it's trying to protect you, this more thinking part of your brain wants the more animalistic part of us that wants to do the most fun, interesting, easy, calorie-rich thing right now. And it'll try and direct our behavior by projecting that negative consequence very vividly. So if I know I like to go over by this watering hole, but there's that hole that snakes come out of, it'll create a very vivid image of a snake coming into that hole to try to keep the animalistic part of me that goes, there's easy water. I don't want to go all the way to the next water hole because this one has snakes in it. But now it does that without the physical threats, and it does it with mental, abstract, sometimes not real at all. It can be responding to a thing that happened negative in a video game, or something online or something I heard about happening to somebody else, gossip about someone I don't even know, and I'm all fired up about how wronged that person was, because my brain uses that negativity to keep me safe. My ego thinks it's keeping me safe by feeding me that at high amplitude to make sure I listen to it. But some of those things are no longer worth listening to, and filtering those out can actually keep you safe, make you healthier. Stress kills you. It causes heart attacks and hypertension and strokes, and leads to other negative behaviors, eating poorly and not exercising, and smoking or other addictions, all the stuff we've talked about. So filtering out the excess negativity it's bringing in to try and protect us is actually one of the best ways of dealing with stress and our ego.
The answer to alleviating stress is going to be resolving what's going on inside here so that we can choose our response instead of reacting to our mind's perceived threat.
And changing our filters so we recognize which of those perceived threats are actually worth devoting time and energy to, instead of just leaving the floodgates wide open and casting this huge net for all these negative things that might come in that the world throws at us trying to get our attention. If you can reduce those filters, so just the real threats, the things that actually are really worth paying attention to, like traffic. If I'm driving in traffic and I'm fixated on my job, I might be physically endangering myself over something that may not be a real danger. There's two things you can do to deal with stress. You can adjust the filters so the things that cause stress don't come in anymore, or don't come in the same way. So you recognize that when I watch the news, it is designed by people with PhDs and business degrees in evoking our responses, and I can recognize that and tune into it less, or engage with it less, or just disengage, just not go to news sources that deliver information in that way.
In a fear-based way.
In a fear-based way, which is hard to find. Even if you go to independent news sources, if they want to get headlines, then they throw negative hooks, because that's what works. That's what triggers most people. Or you can deal with the stuff that has gotten through. You can actually process it, and rather than just responding to it on instinct and out of this protective ego construct, you can choose a response. You can weigh and evaluate and make decisions from a more rational or healthy emotional way, instead of spontaneous, negative, reactive, skipping the thoughtful part of our brain, going straight to the animalistic part that goes fight or flight, and then
fight or flight or freeze.
Fight, flight, freeze, and then shuts down that part of us that can actually solve the problem.
But it's just our mind, believing that it's helping us by, making sure that we're safe. We're here to tell you that there's another way to do that is way more effective, that actually has a sense of peace that you can claim in a moment.
Without anyone else or anything else, just on your own.
Absolutely.
When you are in fight or flight, when you are really stressed and reacting to stress, especially if you are living that way, if you are constantly in that stress response, if it's an immediate danger, then that can be the right thing. The blood goes away from your brain, or at least to the more thoughtful, future-based parts of your brain. It goes towards your core. It floods your muscles. You start to release adrenaline and cortisol to do physical things. Like, have you ever been cut off in traffic and you get that immediate response? Well, that's your body getting ready for a physical response to a physical danger, of which your response might be hitting the brake or steering around. And then you don't need all that, but you can get triggered and then be producing all those chemicals designed to do that. And then in their body, if not burned off, then they stagnate or do other destructive things. So that's the immediate physical. But then if you get stuck in that fight or flight response, other things that it does is it's getting ready for a fight to the death. It's essentially what happens when that gets triggered. And so it goes, we don't need digestion. If you're dead, it doesn't matter if this food gets digested. In extreme cases, it can void your bowels even. to get ready for. I don't need this extra weight, and I just need everything I can do to survive this next moment. It can be harder to sleep. You can get insomnia if you're constantly living in fight or flight. You don't heal as well, because it doesn't matter if that old injury heals quickly, because right now it doesn't matter if my arm isn't working 100% because I need to survive the next few minutes. If you're experiencing issues with digestion or having a hard time sleeping, or you heal very slowly, or you get sick a lot, it suppresses your immune system, because it doesn't matter if I get an infection or if I get a cold that might make me sick or might kill me in a few days because this bear is attacking me now. It is designed for an immediate response, and living there kills you. Living with too much stress and responding constantly to negativity can cause you to live most of your time in that state, and nothing quite works right except things designed for immediate combat.
And then you wonder why you look pale and you don't feel rested and you're not enjoying life and you're exhausted.
And you're combative, you're arguing with people because you're in that combative mode. You're designed to fight in that mode.
The fight, flight, and now they have freeze also, coming from our basal brain, is what kept us alive for millions of years. Then you add a prefrontal cortex to that, and you're still running on those chemicals that are generated as they were a million years ago, but now they can be stimulated by mere thoughts. And it ends up being this reactive thing that we were talking about that's caused from all this stress, where we just react to the stimulus, shows up in three basic ways. And then if you use the fight, flight, or freeze, now that you have thinking brain on top of that, so the fight part is pretty simple. You get angry and you start blaming the other person for your reaction. Flight is, the reaction is you avoid, right? You get away from whatever it is that's causing that stress. The freezing one is pretty interesting. The freezing one usually shows up by playing nice. And all three of them are very separating. You separate from yourself, you're separating from other people, and you're separating from life as well. And that's a lot of work. Not fun to maintain.
And your best thinking got you here. Oftentimes, when I was younger, I would just try to figure it out. I wouldn't take action most of the time. I would avoid taking action as much as possible. I would just sit and think through it, usually in isolation. And if you think about whatever problems you have, generally thinking about it doesn't fix it. There is some physical action, talking to somebody or sending that email or having that phone call or doing that thing or stopping doing that thing. There's a physical action that actually needs to be done if you want that to be resolved. So just sitting and thinking about it, it can give you insights on what to do, but if you're just mulling over and over and over and over, you are actually creating a new problem, which is that endless mulling. And sometimes it's better to take even a somewhat misguided action, so you're at least doing something and then can course correct, than to just sit there and think over it over and over and over again.
That endless spin cycle. Many people talk about that they get stuck in. They can't go to sleep at night because the brain becomes a spin cycle and the thoughts keep churning and churning and churning. And what you're talking about, doing something else, that something else usually is something that gets your brain to shut up completely. Like some physical activity or some, conversation or something that helps you get in touch with yourself here and out of here. The longest trip in the world is getting out of your head and getting into your heart. And the shortest trip in the world is going the other way. One of the other things that we found really impacts our personal stress in our life is resentment. Resentment that we're holding on ourselves, it can go way back. And many of us don't even believe we're carrying resentment on ourselves or somebody else. I remember one time believing, I don't have any resentment for my dad. I left my mom after 26 years of marriage. No, we're good, we're fine, we're getting along. And yet when I chose to look at it and say, is there resentment there? The resentment didn't stop when that happened. The resentment was all the way back to when I was 3. And there's 3 basic ways we carry resentment: against ourselves, against other people, and against life.
Life sucks.
Yep. How many times do you hear that? Life sucks. Life's unfair. Life's always bad. Life's never, it seems like we have an opinion that life never shows up all the time. It's always bad or it's always negative. And we can't take too much love or have too much fun because that means bad things are going to happen. Its own kind of resentment. And one of the fastest ways that we've found to lay down resentment is Ho'oponopono. I would highly recommend you get the book and read it, but quite simply, it's looking at the person, looking at the situation or ourselves, and quite simply saying, I'm sorry, please forgive me, I love you, thank you. It can have an effect in just a few times repeating that.
Even if, surprisingly, having tried it when I was much more cynical and shut down and resistive, I would try it even believing it was garbage, and it still had an effect, even in spite of that. One of the best things I have found to do when I'm really stressed out is take some deep breaths and literally remove myself from my present location. It might even be something at my computer and getting up and walking away from my computer, or I just got a text that's stressing me out and setting my phone down and walking away from it. Not as a permanent thing. It's not a solution of, now I'm just going to give up computers because that thing stressed me out.
Not avoiding. Just getting some space, especially if you're really triggered and there's a lot of emotions surging around. So walking away from whatever it is, if it's another person, you can say, I'm really upset right now, and I'm just going to take a couple minutes to calm down a little bit. And you can ask for permission if you feel like that's helpful, but you don't need their permission. You can say, I'm going to do that, and then I'll come back. And then you can leave. So that's one thing you can do real time in the moment. One of the things I've found effective in a conversation, particularly if the person's angry at me and they're getting heated in the conversation, like Mark was talking about, taking that deep breath is important. And I've found that if I gear my mind differently about the conversation, where I start paying attention to the words that they're speaking as if I'm going to repeat back every single word, and just that focus actually helps me get out of my reaction and then start listening to what the person's actually saying. My reactivity goes away and my mind seems to have this different space or a different part of me that I get to inhabit. I get to be calm, and I can even repeat back some of the stuff that they said if they have pertinent points that need to be addressed.
And actually hear what they're saying, rather than getting in that reactive loop where they say something, you get triggered, and then you just wait for them to shut up so you can blast them back.
Yeah, I can't hear them anymore because I'm just preparing my reaction.
The counterattack.
Yeah.
Another thing I do is I actually, especially difficult for me, being a very introverted, very thoughtful, analytical, detached most of the time person, is actually let myself feel what's really going on, and not with a mind to figure it out or solve it, but just go, you know what? I've really got a tightness in my chest, and what is that actually about? Just relaxing it can remove a bunch of the pressure and help me respond or figure out what it is. If I'm actively in a situation that's causing me stress, there usually isn't time to do this, but sometimes even while someone is in my face or while I'm listening to a very difficult voicemail or whatever it happens to be that is triggering the stress, just listening or observing and just feeling what's actually going on in my body, in my throat, in my head, feeling this pressure in my head or my gut is clenching, just feeling that and letting it go. Okay, it's okay. Whatever's going on right now, I'm okay. Just doing that can help me get through it, because otherwise I get caught up in this cycle of body acts and mind goes, what's going on with the body? Oh, we're stressed out, so stressful thoughts, and body checks in with the mind and goes, what's going on? Oh, we're having stressful thoughts, let's get stressed out. So I can break that cycle by just doing this one part, just focusing on this part and shutting that part up, or ignoring it if it wants to blabber, just going, okay, you can say what you want, right now it's not important, and just feeling it. That can be really helpful.
One thing that comes to mind for me in the middle of a stressful situation is I used to have this belief that I had to fix it, and I wasn't able to leave the conversation until the other person was okay. I've since found it's okay to walk away from the conversation without the other person being okay, but I will make an agreement with them. Okay, look, I get this isn't really going anywhere and it's not getting myself out of the anger or frustration I'm feeling, so I'm choosing to leave, but I'm willing to come back to this conversation at a later time and book an appointment to come back to it. And I found that can be really helpful for me to go away, re-examine the situation away from that other person, see what my part is, and even though it might have been, I'm believing at the time it's 99% their fault and it's 1% my fault, when I get to step away and look at my 1%, my 1% has a tendency to grow a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And then I can look at that and I'll call the person up and say, hey, look, I'm sorry for our conversation the other day. I was angry and I want to apologize for that. It's not how I want to be with you. Can we resume the conversation at 3 o'clock tomorrow?
Another thing I do or work on doing when I'm stressed, this one especially happens if it's something building up over time. There's that thing that I just haven't gotten to. It's a big pile of paperwork or emails I haven't responded to, or something at home, something I've been putting off, is act. The best way to avoid apathy and depression and the endless mulling is actually doing something about it.
Physically move.
Yeah, get up and do something. If it's the middle of the night and I realize that I'm stressed out about some interaction I had with a client, I can get up and type out the email. I usually don't send it at 3 o'clock in the morning because that can give a weird message, but I'll physically get up and type it out so it's out of me instead of laying there for 2 hours mulling over what I'm going to say or what I should do. I'll get up and do something, and then I'll get up in the morning having laid that down and be able to look at it again with clear eyes and having it gotten it out so I can sleep. But getting up and actually doing something. I might also get up in the middle of the night and write a to-do list. So tomorrow I'll get my phone and schedule a bunch of things, or get on my computer quick and go to my to-do list and just add a bunch of things and a rough date of when I'm going to do it so that I can let go of it.
That can be very helpful.
A lot of our stress is from not dealing with issues that we could be dealing with but don't want to. And taking some action, even if it's just one tiny step of maybe I'm unhappy about my weight, and just taking one step of when I get up in the morning, I'm just going to do 5 push-ups. And just that one step, if I actually have something actionable that I can actually do, that can lead you off that one little step. Not, I'm going to do a 3-hour workout tomorrow. I'm just going to do one thing, and that action can lead to further action.
Yeah, because energy begets more energy. As you keep moving, then you end up doing more, and that's therapeutic and healing. I found for myself that there are times when I'm recognizing that I'm just wound up, and you and I might have a conversation, and you'll say, well, what phone call haven't you made lately that you've been talking about doing, or what conversation have you not had that you told yourself you were going to have? And it's usually one that I'm not wanting to have because it's going to be a little uncomfortable. I've got something to clear up, whether it's a work issue or a personal issue. And then I'll go, oh, yeah, that. And then I'll make a commitment to get it done within 24 hours.
Yeah, giving yourself 24 hours seems to be a great window. It's easier to hold yourself to it if it's within 24 hours. If you go next week, I'll do it. Next week, for most of us, might as well be never. So within 24 hours. And for me, I physically put a reminder in my phone that will go off and my phone will vibrate 15 minutes before I'm scheduled to do that thing. I might not always do it, but if I don't delete it, I just bump it to tomorrow. And eventually, those reminders hitting me over and over every day, oh yeah, that phone call that I'm putting off, I'll do it tomorrow. But as long as I don't delete it, eventually I get to it. 99% of the time. Or I realize that it's not actually that big a deal, and I let it go after it's come up on my phone 30 days in a row. That actually, if I haven't done it for 30 days, maybe it's not actually as important as I thought.
Maybe it's not important at all.
Yeah. Another way of handling stress is meditation. And there's lots of different types of meditation. There's podcasts you can get, and websites you can go to, and blogs you can read, and
apps on your phone,
YouTube videos you can watch. There's lots of ways of getting into meditation. And if you don't like the word meditation, just take some time dedicated to relaxing and unwinding where you're not solving your problems or even thinking about your problems. Put on some music you really like and just relax listening to your music or get fired up
Mm-hmm.
by the music, or do an activity you like. Maybe you like riding your bicycle, so you're going to get on your bicycle, and for that 30-minute bike ride, you're not going to think about the problem. Give yourself some space, not only to let the stress level go down a little bit, but we actually have this really powerful set of processors in our brain, the subconscious, that grind away on problems. And if you're actively thinking about it all the time, they don't get a piece of it.
Right.
And if they do have a piece, your brain's already full. So if it has input, if you ever suddenly realize in the middle of the night, you wake up and go, oh yeah, that's what I need to do, that's your subconscious grinding away.
Mm-hmm.
And if you keep it lodged up here, then it doesn't get a chance.
One of the coolest things about meditation is it actually energizes you. And if you would have told me that 40 years ago when I opened my first gym, I would have told you you're nuts. How can sitting still, being quiet, and breathing energize you for the rest of the day? And in my experience with meditation, when I'm doing it regularly, I get just as much energy out of that as I do my, hour-long workout. And what I found with meditation, it's important for me to use a guided meditation to where I'm being directed on where my breathing is going, like up to my crown and down to my base, and that helps me keep my mind from thinking. The important part of meditation is to get your brain paying attention to the meditation, the quiet, the lack of thought, and it gets preoccupied. I remember a Buddhist monk video that I saw. He said, yeah, it's really easy to preoccupy your brain. All you have to do is say, okay, brain, pay attention to this breath in. And the brain says, okay, I'll pay attention to this breath in. And then it does. And then you say, okay, brain, pay attention to this breath out. And then it goes, okay, I'll pay attention to this breath out. And there's no other thought.
An actual coping mechanism that works, it can be challenging to set up, but probably the most effective one I know is a support network. And many of us feel isolated now. We're connected digitally, but separated personally and physically. And so we have these false fronts that we throw up to make our life look good, this pixel thin wall that we put up to make our life look positive from the outside. And then we're alone behind our wall and struggling. So Troy and I have been meeting for 12 years, once a week, most weeks. We miss once in a while. But our relationship is primarily devoted to supporting each other, to listening when they talk and giving unbiased, sometimes brutally direct opinions and advice and thoughts on what's going on for them, and then seeing what's coming up.
It's feedback without judgment.
Yeah.
We've learned to listen and speak to each other without judgment. And we're careful not to make each other wrong, because we each do that well enough on our own.
Yeah. So that network, and having just one person is amazing, and having multiple people, sometimes I'll talk to Troy and I'm just not getting what he's saying. Like, he has a certain way of putting it and it just doesn't quite click. So then I have my old roommate that I go out to lunch with, and I've got my dad who I can talk to, and sometimes I get it from him when I didn't get it from other people, and sometimes I don't hear what he's saying, it's just not hitting me right, so then I talk to my mom. And if that isn't working, sometimes it's talking to my wife. And there's no priority in these. It just depends on, it may be like something comes up right before I meet with Troy, or this really stressful thing happens at work, and so I go home and there's my wife. And sometimes talking with the first person helps me get through it, and sometimes it doesn't, and then I've got somebody else. But having one person makes all the difference in the world, and having more just multiplies that. Having that support network divides your problems by the number of people that you have in your network.
In a marriage situation, my wife and I are both coaches, life coaches, but we're not the ones to process each other all the time. There are many times where whatever she's grinding on, I'm not the person to help her. And so I encourage her to go to her support partner, and she'll tell me the same thing. She goes, well, I guess I'm not getting you there. It might be time to call Mark. So absolutely want to have a support network. And you'd be amazed at how uplifting a support network can be when you're bonding over the laying down of resentment and experiencing more of the truth about ourselves and each other and life.
When I heard about a support partner for the first time, I thought it sounded ridiculous. Why would I want to waste that much time just talking about stuff?
We talked about that at the end of our first 6 weeks.
Yeah. Yeah.
What a waste of time.
Yeah, but somehow we met up again. Even if the whole hour we're meeting, or however long it is, even if it's all about them, and it's just an hour of Troy talking about a situation in his life, or I come up and I'm just got this thing that's overwhelming me, he says, "How are you doing?" And I just launch into it. I found even when I'm on the receiving end of that, when I'm just listening and observing, that I get something out of it. When I see Troy work through something difficult, then it gives me the courage to work through that, something similar. Or
and vice versa. When I
Yeah.
watch you work something difficult, I get something out of that, even if you take up the whole hour.
Yeah. And before, there's been times when one or the others has apologized, "I'm sorry that this was about me this time," and almost always the response is, "Well, I got just as much out of it." It's not like I'm sacrificing my hour for Troy. It's, I think, almost without exception, especially recently, when Troy and I meet, I leave feeling more connected and more centered and more present and more open than I was. And it wasn't always that way. It was rockier at the beginning when we were laying the groundwork for setting this up. But if you can get it, it will change your life.
I remember times when we were working together and sitting down thinking, everything's great, I'm fine, cool, we're good. And then you'll be talking about something for you, and then all of a sudden I'll like drop in like, oh, yeah, I wasn't actually fully here, but now I am. I'm fully home inside myself, and thank you for that.
We started off talking about coping mechanisms, both our coping mechanisms and other ones that don't work.
And then there's the judgmental language that happens in our society.
The shoulds, the have-tos, the musts,
Always, never.
and their negative effects. Talk about the equation for suffering, where you project that reality should be somewhere other than where it is, and that keeping you from responding and creating more suffering.
We talked about the physical stress on your body of the anxiety that you're creating in your own mind and how we might be addicted to it.
We talk about this lion-sized hole where your brain pretty much has a space for large problems, and if it doesn't have them, it will manufacture them.
And how it's really not the outside world or other people that are causing our stress. I mean, they're saying and doing the things that they say and do. Things are happening in the world that's happening. It's not their fault that you're experiencing or that I'm experiencing stress. It's what my mind is doing with everything that's being said and done, or what I'm witnessing that's creating my stress. Then you have our ego protection mechanism that wants to keep us safe. And it worked pretty good a million years ago to keep us out from getting eaten by a large furry animal or eating the wrong berries. But when we added all the thinking with the prefrontal cortex, then it started spinning all kinds of yarns that are just designed for stress, and it's not really true.
And we talked about how its general structure, how it operates, is it wants to control your future to make it safe by making the present look just like the past. Even if the past is negative, it prefers familiar and bad over unfamiliar and unknown.
And we talked about how people can bond negatively and how that doesn't help.
Yes. We ran through a couple ideas for writing exercises. If you have time to sit down and reflect, where you can write out what actually are the things that are creating stress. What's the fuel for those negative thoughts that are keeping you up at night, or stressing out, or making you want to pick up a cigarette, or have an affair, or whatever it is.
And we also did a writing exercise where you would actually pick an event and find out like what your mind was saying about it by investigating the feelings in your body, and then being able to tell the truth, choose and visualize how to move forward so that you can actually change the response altogether to that type of an event again.
Yeah, more in-depth approach on something that's safer. It's in the past, that you can use a time machine to go back and re-experience and re-evaluate in slow motion, like after a sports team has finished a game, they sit down and analyze with a coach from some outside people who watch and said, this worked, this didn't, this isn't serving you. The same thing, but just doing it with our experiences. I had that fight with this important person in my life, and afterwards I can go back and go, well, actually I was really responding because they were acting like my mom, and to actually get some insight on why you were doing what you were doing, much less why they were doing what they were doing.
Yeah, we don't get to change the other person's behavior, but we do get to change how we respond to it.
We had a discussion about buttons or wounds, whichever analogy works better for you, where all of us come out of childhood into adulthood with various wounds, intentional or unintentional, and most of us protect our wounds rather than healing them. Or we have our buttons, and most of us try and fend people off,
Keep them away.
keep people from touching our buttons
Yeah.
rather than removing the buttons, either because we don't know how to, or it's too scary or too much work. But it is exhausting keeping people away to protect yourself, and then you're keeping people away.
When you actually would like to be held by that person.
We're not perfect, and we don't have life perfectly figured out. We have times when we struggle. If we didn't, we wouldn't need each other for support anymore. So none of this is stuff you have to do. None of this stuff that we're saying we're completely right on. If you find something we're wrong about, great, let us know. Or
Absolutely.
find something, if you had something better than what we're doing, let us know. We're both open to feedback and always looking for better ways. I'm an optimizer. I'm trying to optimize every area of my life. I'm just optimizing for different things than I used to. Before it was perfection, and now it's for connection and openness and efficiency. And I've optimized my optimizing to create more happiness in my life. But none of this you have to believe, none of it you have to do. We just found it so helpful in our lives and have seen so many people struggle and have helped so many people who were struggling and had even one little piece of this that can change people's lives, that we wanted to offer this to as many people as possible in the hopes that someone might find it helpful, even if it's a tiny bit as helpful as we found it.
Yeah, we didn't want everybody to have the same struggle that we did. We would have loved to have had this information when we were middle school, high school. We've heard many people that we've gotten to work with say, why don't they teach this stuff in middle school or high school? It would have saved so much collateral damage. And then when they asked us, well, can you work with teenagers? Can you help somebody out? We were like, yeah, let's give it a go. The biggest piece that I would like to leave you with about anxiety and stress is that it really is not the world that's causing your stress. It's not your job that's causing your stress, and it's not your friends and family or your spouse or kids. They are not causing your stress. It's what your mind is doing with what they're saying and doing and what's happening in front of you that's causing your stress. So the bad news is you can no longer blame all those people for your stress. Or you can't blame the world or the politicians or the world events or your kids for your stress. But the really good news is, because it's your mind that's creating your stress, you can do something about it. And it doesn't need to be medicated.
You can keep blaming them. It's free will, you can choose to. But if you believe even a part of what we've said, and part of it resonates with you, then in our belief system, the way both of us operate in the world is that I am responsible for what happens in me.
And I'm responsible for how I feel.
What I want to leave with is all of us are wounded. I've never met somebody that didn't have some wound at some level. Maybe I did and I didn't recognize it. But all of us seem to have our flaws and our coping mechanisms that don't work. We do too. We're not perfect. This stuff that we're talking about is stuff we actively practice and work on and try and improve and get better at.
And it keeps evolving. In 12 years, it's been evolving like crazy.
Yeah, 10 years from now, maybe we'll do none of this stuff. All of us are wounded. All of us are struggling in some way. Most of us are suffering to some degree or another. For me, that instills compassion. And I recognize that all the people around me are probably struggling at least as much as I am. I at least have all these tools and this huge support network. But most people don't seem to have that. They don't know these things, and they don't have that level of support.
And many people don't even have physical conversations, face-to-face conversations with another human being for quite a long time.
Yeah. When I was in middle school, I would go days at a time without saying a word to anyone. But the good news is, having been to the depths of suicidal depression, standing on a bridge, looking down, trying to figure out if the jump would kill me or not, and only that lack of certainty that it would, that I might just be maimed instead, preventing me from doing it, being at that point where I was about to end my life and thinking life was only getting worse, it is my belief that however bad it is, it can get better. It might be really challenging. It might be terrifying. You might not often know what the right answer is, but it can get better.
Many things that are going on in our lives are things that we don't like. And our mind can put all kinds of adjectives on it, but the truth is we don't like it. And it happened. And what I found is the quicker I can get to the acceptance of I didn't like that, but it happened, then I get to start working on my response to that. And getting that most of the things that happen outside of me, I'm not in control of. And then I can be with it differently. And then I get to be with people differently in those types of situations. I have a lot of love coming forward for you to hear you talk about it. At one point, you almost thought about ending your life. And I'm really grateful for whatever that was. I'm guessing it wasn't this that made you step back and choose life. So you could be with me here now. Thank you.
Yeah. Anything else?
No, I'm complete.
Okay.